the Scramble for Africa from 1880 till 1914, also known as the Mad Scramble for Africa or just the colonization of Africa. If you look at this image, you're going to see some of the countries that were involved in colonizing Africa. These are European countries, right? You see France, you see Belgium, you see Holland, also known as see Britain, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain. All of these countries in the late 1800s decided that they were going to, get into Africa, take over as much territory as they can in order to increase the strength and the wealth of their own empires. So let's take a look at a map here. So here we have Europe. This is where the mother countries of these empires were. And then Africa is not far from Europe, right? Africa is just south of Europe. Uh, and so we've talked a lot about the colonization of the Americas, right? So the Americas were colonized by European empires, throughout the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. However, throughout the late 1700s and then throughout the 1800s, these European colonies in the Americas got their independence. So they separated from the empires of Europe and they became independent countries. And so Europe did not have the same colonies in the Americas that they used to have. And it wasn't until the late 1800s where Europe starts to make progress in colonizing Africa, right? And so that came later. That was what we sometimes call the second wave of imperialism, right? The first wave of imperialism is focused on the Americas. The second wave of imperialism is focused on Africa. And Asia was in some ways part of both of those waves of imperialism. Okay, but today we talk about Africa. So the question that you have in your notes for the Scramble for Africa is, why did European countries want to colonize Africa? Why would they want to do that? Well, here's a quote that can give you some insight, and you don't need to write down the yellow stuff. The color for this lesson will be green. So this is Cecil Rhodes. He was an imperialist, and he said, we must find new lands from which we can obtain raw materials and at the same time exploit the cheap slave labor that is available from the natives of the colonies. The colonies will also provide a dumping ground for the surplus goods produced in our factories. So in the last lesson, you learned about all of the factories that were being built in Europe, right? Europe was going through a process called industrialization. Europe had undergone the Industrial Revolution towards the end of the 1700s and then throughout the 1800s. Europe started to look more like what you see on the screen right here. And so they built factories. And what do factories need? Well, they need two things. They need raw materials and they need people who are going to buy their finished products. However, by the time we get into the late 1800s, Europe doesn't have as many colonies as it did during the first wave of imperialism. A lot of those colonies now have their independence. So they need to go out and get some more colonies, right? And so they set their eyes on Africa because European countries required two things for their newly industrialized economies. They required raw materials and they required populations to buy their finished products. So you can write down the green stuff here in your notes. All right, so Europeans did not just get the idea of colonizing Africa in the late 1800s. Europeans have been trying to colonize Africa for a very long time. However, they were not successful in doing so. They knew that Africa existed. They knew that Africa was right there. They had already taken many African people and sold them into slavery in the Americas. Africa was already, at least coastal Africa, was already very much part of this new globalized economy that was based in imperialism. However, Europeans were not able to get deep into Africa. So they had set up a lot of like ports and trading, trading ports, I guess, trading, what do you call those? Trading forts, or trading posts, that's the word, trading posts along the coasts of Africa. And they had colonized much of South Africa, but they were not able to penetrate into the interior of Africa for a very long time. And so why was that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. There's many reasons, but we're going to talk about a couple. One of them was malaria. right? So this is a disease that is transmitted by mosquitoes. And Europeans did not have immunity to malaria, and they did not know how to deal with malaria. And as they got into Central Africa, there was a lot of malaria, and Europeans had this tendency to build their towns and their cities right near water, right? Which makes a lot of sense, right? However, near the water, that's where the mosquitoes were breeding. And so the mosquitoes who were transmitting malaria were killing the Europeans. Meanwhile, the Europeans were looking at the local African people. The local Africans were building their communities up in the hills away from water. And Europeans were like, why are you doing that? Well, we now know that the Africans were doing that because that allowed them to stay away from the mosquitoes that were giving them malaria. So anyway, Europeans, they tried, but they couldn't dig into Central Africa for a super long time. Also, remember when Europeans colonized the Americas? They had three secret, well, secret and not so secret weapons: guns, germs, and steel. And those three things really gave Europeans a massive advantage in the Americas. However, when Europeans got to Africa, those three things did not give them the same advantage, right? Because Africans had guns too, Africans had germs too, Africans had steel too, right? And so it was difficult for Europeans to colonize Africa because they didn't have the same advantages, right? However, Europeans were able to colonize South Africa earlier as part of the first wave of imperialism. And if you look at like the geography, you see that South Africa is like of a comparable distance from the equator as Europe is. That means the climate in South Africa is a little bit more similar to the climate in Europe. So it was a bit easier for Europeans to colonize South Africa. But as they got into Central Africa, the climate was very different and they were exposed to new stuff that they were not ready for, and they weren't able to colonize Central Africa quite as easily. But eventually, in the mid to late 1800s, a few things helped the Europeans in their quest to colonize Central Africa. And let's talk about what those were. Ah, look at this. They now had the steam locomotive, which allowed them to build railroads into Africa, right? And when they had railroads, that allowed them to bring fresh supplies and fresh troops up to the, what do you call that? To the front lines of their battles against local African empires, right? And then very, very importantly, they had this, right? What is this? A machine gun, right? So they invented the machine gun. Industrialization was the big thing. Europe was now industrialized. And so they had these new inventions like the locomotive and the machine gun and other stuff, but these are the big two that gave them a lot more strength and just allowed them to take over Africa. So this is optional. If you want, you can pause this video and you can go watch a clip from episode 3 of Guns, Germs, and Steel. I did not put this in my YouTube channel because I don't want students thinking they have to watch the entire thing. But if you are interested, you can go and watch like a 2-minute clip of episode 3, Into the Tropics, from Guns, Germs, and Steel. You can just look it up on YouTube. You'll find it pretty easily. If you just search Into the Tropics, it'll come up. And just watch from 1842 to 2130, and it'll give you a picture of what it looked like as Europeans colonized Africa. You don't have to watch it if you don't want to, but if you are interested, go ahead and do that. Okay. So what eventually helped Europeans conquer Africa? Well, industrialization, right? It gave Europeans advantages such as railroads and the machine gun, and it allowed Europeans to get into the interior of Africa and colonize it. Okay, so you can take a look at this map here and you'll see that there are arrows pointing inward, right? So the Germans, they're making their way into Southwest Africa. The French, they're making their way up into Northwest Africa, right? The British, they were already, they had a strong foothold in South Africa, but they are making their way north into the interior. The Germans are also coming in the east, all right? So we see that Europeans make a breakthrough because of industrialization, and they very quickly take over all of, well, I shouldn't say all, almost all of Africa. Okay. All right, so there's a section in your notes where there is a picture of all of these guys standing around tables, and then there's also this picture here in your notes. In that section, I want you to write the title of that section, which is the Berlin Conference of 1884. So, as many different European nations took over Africa very quickly, they decided that they needed to come up with a way to avoid conflict between each other, right? Because they all wanted the same thing. They all wanted more territory. They all wanted natural resources. They all wanted colonies in Africa. And there's only so much territory to take over until they get to the point where they need to take territory from each other. And so they came up with a coordinated plan. And they had a conference, so a big meeting in 1884 and also in 1885. And they got together, and this picture here might give you an idea of what they did. They basically took a map of Africa and they said, okay, Germany, you're going to take that part. Okay, France, you're going to take that part. Okay, Britain, you're going to take that part. Okay, the Netherlands, you're going to take that part, right? And they divided Africa, the African territory and the African people. They divided it up amongst themselves, and they made a plan so that all of them could each get a piece of Africa. Okay, so this is the notes that you can write in that section. Leaders of European empires and the USA, right? The USA was there too. They had a meeting in Berlin, and they divided the African territory and decided who would get control of each part. Okay, so that is the Berlin Conference. I'm going to get you to do a little bit of reading about the Berlin Conference and a little bit of reading about the Scramble for Africa in general. So if you were in class, this was a handout that was given to you. However, if you're watching this video, you are probably not in class. So let's see. If you go into D2L, D2L looks like this. You click on resources, content. All right, and then here where it says textbook, if you click on that, there should be a textbook section right here where it says TB, which is textbook. And there are 3 sections of the textbook, of this chapter of the textbook that are being used in this unit. So there was a part on Africa, India, and there's another part on legacies. If you click on that and you scroll down to, which page was it? 140 and 141. So if you were to, let's make it full screen, scroll down to pages 140 and 141. Where are we? Oh, there we are. The Scramble for Africa. Okay, so page 140, there it is. Scramble for Africa. You read this page and you read this page, and then you should have some questions. Let's see the questions. Where are the questions? Working on it. Come on, Hunjay. There they are. These are your questions, okay? So just beneath the Berlin Conference section here, there is the Read the Scramble. Oh, did I make a spelling mistake? Oops. Read the Scramble for Africa handout and answer the following questions. There's some questions here that you answer. And once you've done that, then that is everything. Okay, so that's what you need to do for this lesson. And I hope you learn a few things and I hope you have a good day. See ya.